morning. So it's raining. I wasn't expecting it to be raining. I even looked at the 10-day forecast last night to determine whether or not I can soon change my horses over to night turnout. I always wait until it's consistently 50 degrees at night before I switch my horses over to night turnout. In New York, it used to be Memorial Day weekend or right around there, sometimes a little bit after. But here, last year, for sure, I did it at least 2 weeks early, and I'm probably going to switch them in the next day. Tonight is supposed to be 44 degrees, and then not under 50 degrees thereafter. But what I didn't see was I didn't see rain for today. Whether I just overlooked it because I was direct line thinking about temperature, or I just didn't see it was supposed to rain today. Or it changed. So anyway, I already put everybody out. Daisy and Tucker in their paddock that don't have a shelter. That doesn't have a shelter. And I'm just curious what you might do when you start to attach human emotions to things like that. Now, until I had my own farm, I didn't have access to a shelter during turnout. You know, the only paddocks, I should say, in places that I boarded at that had shelters were the fields, were the rough board horses. So it wasn't normal for me to experience horses with shelter on turnout times. But ever since I've had shelters, I've really attached that as being a must-have. So much so that I actually make it seem like it's a huge handicap to not have it. So, put all the horses out, and then it starts raining, and I have a moment of, oh my God, Daisy and Tucker, they don't have a shelter. All the other horses have shelter. Daisy and Tucker don't have a shelter. Oh no, and then when I walk down to the barn to head back to the house, and I have to head right for them, she calls hey, we don't go out in the rain. So on days that it was bad weather, I would always put, even when it was her and Dewey, put them in a stall that has attachment to my round pen, and they'd be able to go in and out. It's just no grass. So what do you do to soothe yourself in those situations? Like, if you feel like, you're letting your animals down, what do you do to make yourself feel a little bit better about that? I remember back when Ritz was a baby, I remember contacting the farm owner and asking him to leave Ritz in because it was going to rain that day. And I remember him just point blankly saying he's waterproof. And he said it to me like, you dumbass. Now, mind you, he really just had that personality, so whether or not I was really being a dumbass or not doesn't really constitute the attitude. It's just who he was. So I've used that actually, but not in that way. Like, I've said that to people since. And another thing that I've done to kind of help myself, when I rented a barn that was on a facility, so there were other barns there. And I remember talking to one of the owners about the weather we were expecting, and I think her horses went out earlier than mine. Her horses would go out, I think, at 3 or 4, because it was a much larger facility, so I think the horses started going out around 3 o'clock. And I remember saying something about the weather that we were expecting. And that facility, only the, rough board horses had shelter. The regular paddocks didn't have shelter. And this was a classy facility. And I remember her saying, well, once they're out, it's just what it is. They don't go running around trying to bring horses back in. And I think I was still in that phase where I would run and bring them all back in if I thought they were going to be getting wet. And then I moved to a different facility where I was in charge of all things, and I had shelters. And then I got spoiled. Oh my God, did I get spoiled? But now I got spoiled to the point to where I believed it to be something that, I have. Like that's just part of it. Like they should have shelter. My horses are in a stall. Like they don't live outside. They're not rough board horses, so they don't need shelter for the time that they're outside. However, I've now developed this belief. So I remind myself of that. Like, that facility owner basically saying, there's nothing we can do. Once they're out, they're out. But with such a, like, not, I don't want to say duh kind of feeling, but with such a, that's just what it is. And then another thing that I remind myself of is a thunderstorm that took place one night when I was in my property that had shelter, and it woke me out of bed. And I jumped out and I'm scrambling, I'm throwing on my clothes, and it was a pretty intense storm. And yes, I do know horses can be struck by lightning. I've heard of horses been struck by lightning. However, I, for some reason, decided I expected my horse to be freaking out. Not so much that I was worried that they were going to get struck by lightning. I was just worried about them being, like, freaking out. And I pulled back my curtains because my horses were across the street. I had property on both sides of the street, and the ones that were across the street, I could see through my bedroom, my living room, and my kitchen windows. And I'm scrambling to get my clothes on, and I flip open, and I had a black and white paint named Cowboy, and the lightning flashed, and Cowboy is just happily grazing. I honestly think if he could have lifted up his head and looked at me and said, "What?" Like, could care less. So I was able to go back to bed, and now since then I've soothed myself over the years for that. The other thing that I do when I'm really feeling like I'm disappointing my horses or I'm doing wrong by my horses by letting them be in the rain is when I lived in New York, I lived by a huge breeding farm. And I would drive by and I would be like, they have amazing shelters. And on a rainy day, those horses chose to be outside instead of the shelters. So now sometimes it helps me when I see horses that have shelters, including my own, and are not in the shelters, are not choosing to be in the shelters. So this morning as I was leaving, regardless of feeling my, Tucker and Daisy don't have a shelter today, I looked out and all of my horses that have access to shelters are not in shelters. So what do? How do you help yourself kind of get over the human attachments, human emotion attachments that you put on your horses? I apply my not wanting them to get wet on my horses. My horses are probably like, this is great. Not all of them. I do have one that just hates to be wet, but it's just, I guess I'm curious because I was just thinking about him. I'm like, yeah, but I don't even think he was in. I do have one horse that hates to be wet. He hates to be wet so bad that I thought he was colicking one day. He was thrashing so bad when he came into the barn that I thought he was having a massive colic because I didn't connect that he was wet. He was a baby. He was 8 months old, and he was wet and he was freaking out because he was wet. So anyway, a lot of ums in this one. Sorry, but just curious. What do you do to help yourself off the cliff? Back away from the edge. It's going to be fine. They're waterproof. They actually would prefer to be out of the shelters. They're fine. Nothing's going to happen to them if they get a little wet. And the rain today is supposed to be on and off, and it's only like 50% chance at times, and then it's supposed to be a big break, and then maybe start again later. But anyway, I'm fine. They're fine. Get over yourself. What do you do to tell yourself that?